I never imagined my life would take the turn it did. If anyone had told me a few years ago that I would be sitting here, sharing my story and confessing my deepest shame, I would have laughed it off. But life has a way of humbling you, of making you confront the things you bury deep within you, no matter how much you try to ignore them. My name is Vivian, and this is my story. I married Joshua when I was 23. He was everything I thought I wanted in a man: handsome, successful, and driven. He owned multiple businesses and was constantly traveling, sealing deals in different parts of the world, from Abuja to London, London to New York. Joshua was always on the move, and I admired him for that. He provided for me in ways I had never known before. We lived in a large, beautiful house, and I had everything a woman could dream of: designer clothes, expensive jewelry, luxury vacations, and a life of comfort. But soon enough, I realized that while Joshua provided for me materially, there was something missing in our marriage. While stable on the outside, I was empty on the inside. He hardly spent time with me. He would come home late, often exhausted from his work, and fall asleep almost immediately. When he was around, his mind was always on the next business deal, the next meeting, the next flight. I craved intimacy, not just the physical kind, but emotional closeness, something that felt absent in our marriage. At first, I tried to cope. I busied myself with managing the house, attending social functions, and hanging out with friends. But no matter how much I distracted myself, the loneliness would always creep back. At night, I longed for Joshua's touch, for his attention, but it felt like I was invisible to him. It wasn't long before I found myself drawn to someone else, someone I shouldn't have even entertained in my mind, let alone in my heart: Joshua's younger brother, Victor. Victor had moved in with us a few weeks ago after Joshua and I got married. He had just returned from America after completing his master's degree. Joshua had offered to help him get on his feet while he figured out his next move. Victor was charming, easygoing, and always around when Joshua wasn't. He was the complete opposite of his brother. While Joshua was distant and consumed with work, Victor was warm, funny, and attentive. We would talk for hours, and he always seemed to know when I needed someone to talk to. At first, I convinced myself that it was innocent, that we were just close because we lived under the same roof. But deep down, I knew I was treading on a dangerous path. There was an unspoken chemistry between us, a tension that neither of us acknowledged, but it was there, lingering in the background. One fateful evening, everything changed. Joshua had been away for 3 weeks on a business trip in London. I was sitting in the living room, watching TV, when Victor walked in. He had just come back from a night out with friends, and there was something different in the way he looked at me that night. His eyes lingered for a moment longer than usual, and I felt a flutter in my stomach that I tried to ignore. "You're still up?" he asked, sitting down next to me on the couch. I nodded. "Yeah, couldn't sleep." We sat there in silence for a few minutes, the tension between us thickening with every passing second. I could feel the heat of his body next to mine, and my heart began to race. I knew I should get up, go to my room, and put some distance between us, but I couldn't move. Then, out of nowhere, Victor reached out and touched my hand. It was a simple gesture, but it sent a jolt of electricity through me. I looked up at him, and in that moment, something shifted. I saw the desire in his eyes, and I knew he saw it in me too. Before I knew it, I had leaned in, and our lips met in a kiss that was soft at first but then grew deeper and more urgent. My mind screamed at me to stop, to pull away, but my body refused to listen. The kiss quickly escalated, and soon we were lost in each other right there on the couch in the living room. I felt his hands on my waist, pulling me closer, and I didn't resist. I knew it was wrong, but the loneliness I had felt for so long was overwhelming. In that moment, I gave in. He ripped off my underwear and slowly penetrated me. I couldn't help but scream his name, begging him not to stop. As we lay there afterward, the weight of what had happened hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't believe I had crossed that line. I had betrayed Joshua, my husband, the man who had given me everything. Instead of confessing or trying to make things right, I let it continue. A few days later, Victor and I went grocery shopping together. It was a casual outing, something we had done countless times before, but this time, there was an undeniable tension between us. We tried to act normal, pretending like nothing had happened, but the spark was still there, igniting every time our eyes met. On our way back home, Victor pulled the car over on a quiet, deserted street. My heart raced as I turned to look at him, unsure of what he was thinking. But before I could say anything, he leaned in and kissed me again, this time with more intensity than before. I knew it was reckless, I knew it was dangerous, but I couldn't stop myself. We made out in the car, and the way he moved in and out of me made me hold him tight. I felt a rush of excitement, the thrill of doing something forbidden, but deep down, I knew this wouldn't go on forever. One morning, I walked into the bathroom to find Victor standing there, fresh out of the shower, his body shining with water droplets. He looked at me, and I could see the desire in his eyes. I should have turned around and left, but instead, I walked toward him, as if drawn to some invisible force. Without a word, we came together again, our bodies locked in a passionate embrace. He pulled me closer and bent me over. He was rough, but I enjoyed every bit of the roughness. It was wrong, and yet I couldn't stop. The intensity of the moment clouded my judgment, and I let myself get swept up in the desire that had been building between us for so long. The final struggle came on a rainy afternoon. I had just finished dressing up in my matrimonial bed when Victor walked in. The sound of the rain outside filled the room, creating a sense of isolation, as if we were the only two in the world. He looked at me, his eyes filled with the same undeniable hunger, and before I could say a word, he grabbed me by the waist and pulled me closer. I didn't resist. We kissed, and things escalated quickly, just as they had before. He pulled me to the bed, raised my legs up, and before I knew it, he was sucking me down there. I rubbed his head gently, moaning and screaming his name. He turned me over, pulled me to the edge of the bed, and gently slid into me. It was an experience I'd never encountered before. I held him tight, begging him not to stop. I screamed his name so loud that he went even harder. But this time, something felt different. There was a sense of urgency, a desperation that I couldn't place. Then it happened. In the midst of our passion, the door to the bedroom swung open, and there stood Joshua, my husband, staring at us in disbelief. For a moment, life seemed to stop. I could see the shock, the hurt, and the betrayal in his eyes. In that instant, everything came crashing down. Joshua didn't say a word, he just stood there watching as the reality of what I had done sank in. I wanted to explain, to beg for his forgiveness, but no words came out. How could I possibly explain this? How could I justify the betrayal that had torn our marriage apart? In the days that followed, Joshua packed his bags and left the house. He did not fight, he did not even ask for an explanation. He simply walked away, leaving me to face the consequences of my actions. Victor moved out shortly after, and I was left alone in the house that had once been filled with love and promise. The silence was deafening, and the weight of my guilt was suffocating. I had destroyed everything, my marriage, my relationship with my husband, and even my own sense of self-worth. Looking back now, I realize how foolish I was. I had everything, a loving husband, a beautiful home, and a life of luxury, and yet I threw it all away for a fleeting moment of passion. I let my loneliness and desire cloud my judgment, and in doing so, I lost the one thing that truly mattered, my marriage. In the aftermath of my choices, I learned a painful but invaluable lesson. Fleeting desires can lead to lasting consequences. The thrill of a moment can never replace the stability and love built over years. True happiness comes from nurturing and valuing the relationships we hold dear, not from succumbing to momentary temptations. It's vital to recognize our worth and seek fulfillment within ourselves rather than in the allure of the forbidden. In the end, the most meaningful connections require effort, understanding, and commitment,